Welcome to the best of the Leon Charney Report. For over 2 decades, Leon Charney, one of the architects of the historic Camp David Peace Accords, has interviewed some of the most important figures in modern-day history. These interviews provide a window into some of the most significant events of the last 50 years. In this excerpt, recorded in February 2005, Leon Charney speaks with nuclear terrorism expert Graham Allison about the political problems of Russia and Iran, issues which have yet to be resolved.
Do you have colleagues in Russia that you talk to?
We do, actually. I'm going back to Boston tonight because Yeltsin's former national security advisor, Andrei Kokoshin, who's now one of the major Putin people in the Duma, is going to be visiting me in Boston tomorrow.
Oh, that's nice. So are you going to tell him what you...
Andrei and I are friends for a number of years, and he took my book and wrote a review of it for the Russian Foreign Ministry in their internal journal, and then he's even made a small monograph out of it in which he points out that this is a serious threat to Russia, not just to the US, and that Russia needs to be as concerned about nuclear weapons in Pakistan, let's say, that might come loose, or nuclear material from which you could make a bomb in Uzbekistan or Belarus, as we are. So I think he's been quite a good voice in the Russian scene. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of voices. It hasn't gripped Russians the way that it has.
Do they have an intellectual counterpart university, something like a Harvard over there, the University of Moscow?
Well, MGU, the Moscow State University, is the top of their line, but because, first, they had all these horrible years of communism, and then more recently with the bit of convulsion, they're still, a little shaky. But they have serious universities, and they've always had great math and science and, engineering.
But in public policy and
in public policy,
rough,
government,
especially the communists, not much public policy.
You don't want to have training people in.
How about Gorbachev?
Communism.
Have you met with him?
I have, yes.
How do you paint this guy? Interesting guy.
He's a very interesting guy, and we had him visit Harvard on a couple of occasions, and I've seen him over in Russia. I think he certainly surprised the hell out of his communist colleagues because. How did he ever become the leader of the Soviet Union? That was the most remarkable fact. And I think the people who picked him never imagined that he would have been the person that he was. I think that it's a mixture of things. I applaud him for ending the Cold War with a whimper rather than a bang. I lived through the old Cold War period in which, as you did, I could quite well imagine we were going to have a general nuclear war in which all Americans would have gotten killed. And the fact that a country that hadn't been disarmed, they still had all of their nuclear weapons with which they could have destroyed us, they still do today, but that they basically put up the white flag in the Cold War. It's a kind of an amazing accomplishment. And Yeltsin actually had a good line about that. He said, it's not fair. You shouldn't say you won the Cold War. You should say we won the Cold War because we became free too. And so I think what happened was a combination of strength on the part of the U.S., from which the Soviets could never, by virtue of their own effort, overwhelm us, and then the hollowing out of their ideology, so that by the end you didn't have too many believers in a system that didn't make any sense to start with.
You have many Russian scholars, and you have many graduate fellows who study Russian history and public policy, I'm sure. How did Putin become president of Russia? How did this happen? This was like a lonely guy. He was a KGB guy doing something. Was there a deal there with Yeltsin? What happened over there?
Yeltsin,
it's a fascinating story.
It is, and there'll be many books to be written on this, many theses. Basically, Yeltsin, I think, is another extraordinary figure. Very flawed, very complicated.
He loves tennis. I represent a guy named Merit Safin who just won the Australian title.
Indeed, I saw him on the tour.
Right.
Yeah.
So he told me that when he walks in Moscow, he's always hanging around. Yeltsin loves tennis. That I can tell you is for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But basically Yeltsin, realizing his own health and his own circumstances, in case he'd come to the end of his career, wanted to have a successor who would be a modernizer, but who would also be tough enough to govern. So he went through 3 prime ministers in a row. You know, none of them lasted more than about 6 or 8 months. He had Primakov, then he had Koryenko, then he had another one. So he kept, you know, taking one, and the guy's not doing it, and take another one, take another one. How he came to pick Putin, and whether he had any idea how he was going to turn out. I guess he tried him as prime minister, and then Yeltsin became sick again, and he was there, and he seemed to be managing.
Well, it seemed that he also got a blanket pardon. Yeltsin at that time was involved with who knows what. And,
yeah.
There must have been a deal where Putin said, all right, I'm not going to touch you, and I become president of...
right.
Well, one of your scholars
the other
were right
guys,
about this.
The other guys would have given him a pardon too. So the question is,
why pick
what
you?
did he see?
Maybe believed him more. You know, it's called credibility. All right, Iran. It's a headache. Do they have nuclear
Huge.
weapons?
Again, nobody knows as far as I know, but I think that, are they seriously seeking nuclear weapons? I would say absolutely. Are they making progress? Yes, a lot. How far are they from completing their facilities that will enrich uranium, which will be the basis on which they'll make a bomb, or ultimately then reprocess plutonium? I would say, you know, in fact, in Israel, I was there, as I mentioned, in January, talking to people, comparing notes. Some people say, you know, 24 months, some people say 18 months, some people say 36 months, but it's not forever. It's a short
Do you have any
period,
doubts?
and it might be faster.
Graham, after talking to the Israelis, and do you have any doubts that if Israel really thought they got nuclear weapons, they'd do a preemptive attack?
Well, I think there's no question that they've looked at that issue
This
carefully.
I can tell you, yes.
Yes, and whether in the end, and undoubtedly, if you were in charge of the Israeli military, you would have created some plans. But whether somebody decides to pull the trigger, that's another question.
That's Sharon with Bush. You can never do that alone. But Begin did do it in '81.
Yes, he did with Ozark.
And he didn't do it in conjunction with Ronald Reagan. He did it on his own.
Well, there was a little bit of coordination, I think.
You think
but
so?
It was my impression. I don't know for sure, but my impression is that
I think he probably told them. I don't know if he asked them. That's a big difference.
I'm sure he didn't ask, and I don't think Sharon would ask Bush.
No.
No, I mean, if he decides that Israel's national security requires an action to be taken, he might inform, he might even seek some assistance. I'm sure he would. But I don't think he would ask.
All right, North Korea.
But on Iran, if I say another word, if I could.
Sure.
Iran, I believe, is absolutely a doable deal in diplomatic terms if our objective were simply the nuclear weapons, and I believe that's what it should be. Not that there's not 100 other issues with Iran, but none of them get better if Iran gets nuclear weapons, and most all of them get worse. So I would say there's a deal sort of that's ripe right now, but it would require the U.S.
We don't have a
stepping
diplomatic relationship now with Iran,
and we don't have a policy towards Iran. So I mean, we've just been letting it fester. We make some noises about them from time to time, but that's about it. But you now have the Europeans with the EU3 have negotiated a temporary, voluntary suspension of the work on this enrichment facility.
You believe it?
I do, but I believe it's going to break down unless somebody enters the scene. So I think we need to take some carrots as well as a stick. The stick needs to be a credible military threat to destroy those factories before they become operational.
All right, but why do you
the
think
carrots need to be enough that they can get something, and then we need to have a freeze. And I would say something like a multi-year. I like Al-Baradei's 5-year moratorium. It's verifiable, so you got enough inspectors and an inspection regime to tell. And then we just have a little breathing space for working on the more fundamental problems.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high. To have this courageous man and my close friend killed.
Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. The preceding program was brought to you by Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.